Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. Since last week's episode, the Browns hired offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey and defensive line coach Jacques Cesaire. We also had a pair of interesting conference championship games. Here to discuss, as always, is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. Hey, Chud.
Hey Scott, we're taping this on Thursday morning, and I have to tell you, the sun is out, and it's
What?
good to see it's good to see the sun for the first time in like 40 days.
Well, I'm going to have to
Gosh,
leave my little recording studio to go check that out.
yeah, maybe get out and get a little workout in. Is it too cold to go golfing? I mean, if anyone could figure it out, it's you.
Actually, 48 would not be too cold for me. It's probably too wet, but
Yeah,
the driving range has been on my list of things to do. So I am actually going to try to get maybe an outside run and go to the driving range today, Chud. I'm going to aim big.
gotta love that.
Yeah,
Wow. Hey,
big day.
that's what you get. That's what you get with no Browns game this coming Sunday, or any NFL game this coming Sunday. What are they doing with the Pro Bowl now? Are they still doing that ridiculous thing, or I haven't
Yeah,
keeping track.
yeah. I mean, I'm not. I mean, yeah. They're doing the same. I don't know if it's the same, but they're doing all the dodgeball and those kinds of things. I assume long drive, it was stuff they did last year, and then
Yeah,
the flag football games. I guess on Sunday. I have so little interest in that. But yeah, they're still doing whatever they call them, the Pro Bowl games and all the events. They probably start if not today, tomorrow, and if they're in Orlando this year. So
okay. I got to look in. I kind of have just gotten so far removed from that, but I should look into it just so I know more. But we'll talk at the end of the pod. But those games were fun, man. Those were two great games.
they were a lot of fun. Didn't quite go as I saw them going, and we'll get into that, but they were good games. They really were. I enjoyed them. Um, both of them came down to the end, right? Which is all you're hoping for.
Yeah, one thing it's just a reminder of, you feel like the Browns are close, but yet still not there. When I watch, Mahomes in Kansas City, and I mean, you could say that about most of the teams in the NFL when you compare them to Kansas City, and obviously San Francisco, Purdy getting it done. But do you get that feeling when you watch? Like, do you try to, watch those games and try to piece the Browns into
Yeah,
that game?
I do. That's an interesting topic, Chud, because I think for a long time, right, there was a narrative. You'd watch your Browns on Sunday, and then you'd watch the bad Browns on Sunday, right? The teams that were terrible, the 4-12 teams. You'd watch on Sunday, then you'd watch Sunday night football or Monday night football, and you'd see the best teams in the league, and you're like, man, the Browns aren't even in this category. And I get it, and that was probably accurate. Um, so I think you do it in this sense, and the Browns are obviously way closer, right? And the Browns went into Baltimore and won this season. So I don't know. I don't know if I buy into that. I think that's a little prisoner of the moment. Like, oh my God, the Browns couldn't do this. Well, yeah, I mean the Browns defense could stop. I mean they beat San Francisco, right? So like I think the NFL is such a week to week basis that it's tough to make those conclusions. And when I watch the Browns play at their best, I think they can compete with those teams. Now, if you pick long term, they're not the Chiefs, right? The Chiefs are, and we can have this discussion this week or next week. Like, they're, if not a dynasty, they're a borderline dynasty with what they are doing. So it's hard to compare the Browns who've been to the playoffs, 3 times in 25 years, right? Like, it's hard to make that comparison. And if you look at what Patrick Mahomes does, and consistently, and you look what Brock Purdy did in the end the last couple of weeks, you can say, well, the Browns don't have that. And that might be true, right? We haven't seen it from Deshaun Watson consistently, but like that's what you're hoping, or that's what the Browns are hoping to have, is that type of quarterback that gives them that chance. And that's always going to be the biggest question until we see Deshaun Watson do it. Can he do it, or whoever replaces him? Can he do it? This year it would have been, can Joe Flacco do it in Houston? So I just think I think it's a tricky argument. I still think the Browns roster compares with all those 4 teams. And if there's going to be a deficiency, it's let me say this, when healthy, right? Their tackles don't compare, right? Like there were going to be issues. And if the Browns had beaten Houston, they were gonna have to overcome some serious issues, all the injuries we know about, right? But when they're healthy, I think the roster compares. The question is, does a quarterback play as well as the elite quarterbacks in the league?
Sure. Well, the big story since we last talked, Ken Dorsey is going to be the Browns offensive coordinator. Scott, was he the first choice? And what do you think about him being the choice?
That's a great question, Chud. And I don't have that answer. Hopefully I'll get to that. I'll get that answer at some point. You had Kellen Moore. You had Brian Johnson of the Eagles, formerly of the Eagles. Kellen Moore, long time with the Cowboys, then was with the Chargers for 2023. You had Gerard Johnson, the quarterback's coach of the Texans, and then you had Andy Dickerson of the Seahawks, the offensive line coach. To me, Kellen Moore, I know Kellen Moore was the Browns' first choice. Kellen Moore has the best resume of any of the candidates, the known candidates. Longtime coordinator, 2 spots. He's interviewed for a bunch of head coaching jobs over the last 3 years. Big name. I think we might have talked about this. Well, actually, the Kellen Moore news broke while we were recording it. The fact that they interviewed broke while we were recording last week. So I don't know if we talked about this or not, but he was a guy that I would assume Kevin Stefanski would have had to give up the play calling duties, right? His resume was too good. He was going to be interviewed for other jobs. He winds up getting the job with the Eagles as coordinator. He would have been a big hire. So I don't know if the Browns felt the same way. To me, he would have been the favorite, the number 1 choice. Maybe Stefanski didn't want to give up play calling, which ruled out Kellen Moore. I don't know that yet. Maybe Ken Dorsey calls play, so if he does, then that wouldn't have been holding, the Kellen Moore thing back. Maybe Kellen Moore picked the Eagles over the Browns, right? So I think if you rank the candidates, to me it was Kellen Moore, number 1. And then I think you can make an argument that Ken Dorsey was number 2, especially from an experience standpoint. And that's not everything, but when you're just looking at resumes, right? That, to me, that's an easy way to judge. And Ken Dorsey was the play caller the last year and a half with Buffalo. He gets fired in November of this season. But Josh Allen and the Buffalo offense were really good in 2022. In 2023, they went through a lull and they lost, I think, 5 or 6 games or 4 or 5 games. They didn't get over 26 points for a stretch of games. And then Dorsey winds up being the fall guy. But there's analytics that say the offense was better with him than when he was replaced by Joe Brady. They turned it over a ton. Josh Allen led the league in interceptions, but he also threw a ton of touchdown passes. So I think there's reason to like this hire. And before he was coordinator, he was quarterback coach for a long time with Josh Allen before he became coordinator. And in Carolina with most notably Cam Newton. And Cam Newton won MVP, and they went 15-1 and went to the Super Bowl with Ken Dorsey as quarterback coach, right? And the hires go beyond that, but those are pretty good. Like, those are good resume builders and stuff that I think you look at and you go, okay, this guy has had success with big-time quarterbacks who have similar skill sets to Deshaun Watson, not the same, right? Newton and Josh Allen are huge, powerful runners. Watson's not that tight, but we know that running is part of his game. I think that was attractive about a lot of these candidates, including Ken Dorsey, that he has a background with that type of quarterback or a similar type of quarterback. So if I were ranking them, I would have put Dorsey at number 2. I wasn't convinced that he was number 2 on the Browns list, and I don't know that answer yet. But I think there's people are focused on, oh, man, he got fired by Buffalo. He can't be any good. I don't agree with that sentiment. I think it goes beyond that. And I think there's reasons to like the Dorsey hire.
Yeah, he had a good relationship with Josh Allen, right? Dating back to when he was his quarterback's coach. I mean, that's a big reason why he became the offensive coordinator. They were pretty tight, right?
Exactly, right? I think Allen campaigned for him to be the coach. I know he would not have been the coordinator, right? And would not have been promoted to coordinator if Josh Allen didn't want him to be coordinator. right? That's how it
Well,
works.
yeah. Listening to you talk right now is such a great take because I didn't think about this up until you just brought up Cam Newton and obviously Josh Allen. But when you really sit and think about it, they're bringing in a guy that, and obviously whoever it was, the lights aren't going to be too bright. That's maybe not what I'm saying, but you got to deal with egos and you got to deal with people. You're bringing in a guy who dealt with Cam Newton and Josh Allen.
Yeah.
So in that regard, that makes you feel pretty good about, and I know he's not the quarterback's coach, he's the OC, but still you're dealing with Deshaun Watson, who, this is a larger than life figure. So you need someone in there who has experience in that realm. And that's kind of now listening to you talk what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Chud. And I read an interesting story from The Ringer. I don't know if I mentioned this last week or not, but the coordinator's about more than just calling plays, right? And we don't know if Dorsey's going to call plays or not. My guess, and this is only last time I checked with somebody, it was the decision hadn't been made yet. I don't know if Stefanski had to promise that to Dorsey to get him to be the coordinator. It's hard to give that up, right? Once you've been a play caller, then you take another job and you're not the play caller, but who knows how that dynamic will work. I would think Stefanski still wants to call the plays, but that's yet to be determined. But regardless, my point is it's not just about play calling, right? It's building game plans. It's coaching the other coaches, right? Leading that offensive staff. It's relating to the players and coaching the individuals and relating to guys. And it's not just the quarterbacks, but a lot of it is the quarterbacks. And Dorsey's not going to have the quarterback coach title, right? I've been told that. We haven't had the official announcements and the official breakdown of the reconfigured staff, but they might not have a quarterbacks coach, which then means, like Alex Van Pelt, the coordinator spends a ton of time working with the quarterback, right? Like that's how it works. Regardless if you're the quarterback coach or not, your coordinator spends so much time with the quarterback that's a huge element to this, right? So it is personalities. It's managing personalities. It's getting along with everybody. It's listening to input from coaches on your staff. And I don't know if you read in The Athletic, but they had kind of the behind the scenes, what went wrong with the Jets. And part of it was Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator, didn't listen to something like he wouldn't meet with part of the coaches, like some of the coaches on his offensive staff till like late in the week when the game plan was almost decided, right? Like, so that you can't have that. If you're a successful coordinator, a lot goes into it. And I was around Ken Dorsey a bit when he was quarterback here for a couple of years, right? From I think it was 06 to 08. He was here as a backup quarterback, went 0-3 as a starter. So I was around him. I talked to him enough times. You can tell he's a smart guy, right? He had success playing at Miami. Like, there's reasons to think that he can command a room and lead a group. And the fact that Brian Daboll, when he went from Bills coordinator to Giants coach, wanted him, I think that's a good sign. I really respect Brian Daboll. The fact that the Bills kept him, I think there's a lot of reasons. Now, it doesn't mean he's perfect and he got fired. And if he's a scapegoat, he's a scapegoat, but still stuff went wrong. But I think a lot goes into coordinator than just if you look at offensive stats for a year or two.
Yeah, you brought up Hackett. He was a disaster for the Jets, the Broncos. I'm glad we're not dealing with him.
Yeah.
Funny you bring that up. But I'm going to say that we're probably going to have to wait this out, right, on the play calling. That's going to be a major thing you're going to be writing about a lot. We're going to be hearing it on talk radio. It's going to be almost borderline annoying. And then we'll finally get the answer, and it'll probably just be Stefanski calling the plays.
It's going to be interesting to see how they handle that, Judd, because Stefanski obviously knows whenever we talk to Dorsey for the first time, and I still don't know when that will be. And I don't know if Stefanski will be there, right? Like, sometimes they'll say, hey, probably introduce Ken Dorsey and then leave, right? Or maybe he sits up there next to Ken Dorsey. Or maybe we don't talk to Kevin Stefanski on the record till the combine, right, at the end of this month. Whenever that is, whoever talks about it will be asked that question until there's an answer. And we know that, I think it was, my memory's not great, but I think it was 2020, right, when Stefanski gets this job. I think it was drawn out whether or not he was going to call the plays. Like, it might have gone to training camp or the preseason before he said, yes, I'm going to call the plays. Now, I don't think I'm wrong on that, but I think I'm right on that. And then we had every offseason was, are you still going to call the plays, right? Like, so I don't know if he'll be in more of a hurry to just say, yes, I'm calling them, or no, Ken's calling them, right? If he's made that decision up, there's no reason to delay that. But I do have that thought in the back of my mind, like you said, that this could be something that every time we talk to Stefanski, he's asked if he's going to be calling the plays. And maybe that would annoy him enough that he would get it out of the way. But that usually hasn't affected him.
Yeah, I will say this. I will say, last year, in the past, I probably said there's no chance he'll give up play calling. I would say there's a chance. I just wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, you know what? I would kind of agree with you, Chud. And to me, if you ranked when we were ranking the candidates, right? You looked at Gerard Johnson, the Texans quarterback coach. Well, he'd only been a position coach for 1 year. I don't think there was a huge expectation for him to come in and call plays if he'd gotten that job. So I would have felt like that's a no-brainer. Stefanski keeps the play calling. Same with Andy Dickerson, the line coach. He had not done that, as far as I know. So, and then you go up the scale and you get, okay, Brian Johnson's done it for a year. This was his first year in Philly. It didn't go great and he gets fired. And then you have Ken Dorsey's a step higher. He's done it for a year plus and then gets fired. And then you had Kellen Moore, right? So I think Ken Dorsey's in that gray area where it's not automatic to give it up, but you could give it up and still feel good about it.
Scott, one guy that didn't come up at all with the Browns, and I'm asking this because should we be concerned Arthur Smith going to the Steelers? And you could maybe, if you follow the NFL, laugh at that because he was such a failure as a head coach of Atlanta, but as a coordinator, maybe a different story. Why were the Browns never in on him? And are you worried at all with him going to Pittsburgh to maybe recharge that offense?
It's an interesting question, Chud. And I hadn't thought specifically about Smith with the Browns. But when you look at all these other coordinators, right, there are a ton of coordinator openings. And if you look at the last, I saw some stat, like there's so much change at coordinator across the league over the last 5 years. It's amazing. Like there's crazy head coaching turnover. The turnover coordinator is even higher. And, I think some of that is those guys go on to get head coaching jobs. Some of it's you fire, you struggle and you get fired. Like there's just a lot of turnover there. So we had a lot of openings this year. And you just look at it and I was like, okay, well, how come the Browns didn't talk to this guy, right? And Arthur Smith's one of those guys. And, I think it's, this league works in mysterious ways. And part of it's agent connections, right? Like that's how you get interviewed. Part of it's you work together in the past. And Stefanski's and Andrew Berry, too, the GM, they've been good about not falling into that, right? Like it doesn't have to be, we worked with this guy before, they're open-minded. But I think still that tends to affect some ways how you think, or, you met this guy, his work, whatever it is. So I just think it's interesting how some teams go this way and some teams go the other way. And sometimes there's overlap, but sometimes there's not. I just think that's interesting overall. When it comes to Smith, he's an interesting guy because I thought he did a really good job in Tennessee, right? Like they had good teams. They went to the playoffs. There's a lot of running, right? There's a lot of Derrick Henry offense, but it was a really good run scheme. And then he goes to Atlanta and he can't duplicate that success. And so much goes into that, right? It's not just him as a coordinator. It's, being a head coach and it's the roster and all of that. But he obviously didn't have the success that they were looking for in Atlanta. They also never had a good quarterback, but, is that the only reason he failed? Right. I'm sure there's multiple reasons for that. My point is, I don't know why Stefanski, as far as we know, did not interview Arthur Smith. I talked about looking for that coordinator who can add something different, who can add the working with a running quarterback like a Cam Newton or like a Jalen Hurts, with, a couple of coordinators they had in for interviews. Maybe they didn't think that they had that. I mean, Ryan Tannehill's athletic, but, he wasn't a huge part of the run game, I don't think. Maybe that was it. Maybe Stefanski just didn't think that, maybe he knows them, didn't think they were a match. Maybe he asked Arthur Smith, and Arthur Smith said, "No, I don't want to interview." Who knows? But it is interesting. But the other part of this, Judd, is so when he gets hired by the Steelers, I think to myself, that's a good hire, right? Like I liked what this guy did in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I know people that raved about him, right? Like thought he was a genius. And people in Pittsburgh have had the reaction of, at least people, the Twitter or the X, right? The reaction I'm seeing
Yeah.
on X, right? I'm not in Pittsburgh. The reaction I'm seeing on X from writers and other things is, oh man, all he does is run the ball. George Pickens and Deontay Johnson aren't going to be happy, right? Like I keep seeing that, and it strikes me as weird because the Steelers obviously had huge issues at coordinator this year, right? They fired Matt Canada. They're not bringing back the guy that replaced Matt Canada. And you think Arthur Smith, okay, he's a known commodity. He's going to stabilize things. Yet that hasn't been the reaction out of Pittsburgh, at least that I've seen. And I found that weird.
Yeah. Oh, it's a good point. I know a lot of things in the NFL is fantasy driven.
Yeah, right.
Know,
That's true. That's a good point.
so you might get that reaction, boring offense, running the ball, things of that nature. So I don't know. I mean, not saying that writers think that necessarily, but fans.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the you might be Browns fans might be happy about this. You see the Ravens and Bengals losing a coordinator.
Yeah, and that's my initial reaction, right? Is that's good for the Browns. I mean, the Browns lost their coordinator too, right? So, it's a catch-22 or whatever. You can look at it different ways. Coordinator's not the end-all be-all. And if you have Joe Burrow and you have Lamar Jackson and you have talent, that probably overrides who is the coordinator. Having said that,
but our coordinator, they let him go. These coordinators are now going to be head coaches.
Yeah. No, you're right. That's a legitimate. It's a huge difference, right? It is, and those coordinators had much more influence than Alex Van Pelt did, right? He didn't call the plays. Brian Callahan, I don't know if he called the plays, I think, up there or down there in Cincinnati. I mean, Zach Taylor's part of it, but he was a huge part of that offense for sure. And yeah, so I think there's reason to, at least if you're the Browns or Browns fans, be optimistic that there could be a letdown there, right? A step back. And, I think Brian Callahan did a good job in Cincinnati. I think Mike McDonald did an unbelievable job for the Ravens. And I saw a stat. I don't know if you saw this stat, Chud. The Ravens have now had 5 defensive coordinators leave to be head coaches. Okay.
Wow. I did not see that.
Right. I mean, it's crazy. Actually, this says Callahan did not call the plays, but he was a huge part of that offense down there in Cincinnati.
Yeah,
they had Marvin Lewis, Chuck Pagano, Rex Ryan, now Mike McDonald. I'm forgetting somebody. Oh, Mike Nolan went to San Francisco, right? So they have 5 coordinators. So part of me says, yes, that's the Ravens are going to take a step back because they don't have their guy. And then you think, well, they've been able to hire great guys and their defense has almost always been outstanding. But I think your
it's just a factory.
Exactly. But I think your point's well taken. You lose quality talent, it is tough to replace in any sense, whether it's a player, a coach, somebody in the front office. Doesn't mean you can't overcome it, but it's a blow. I don't think if you lose a really smart coach, regardless, yes, it's not the end of the world, but it's a blow, and you got to find somebody as qualified to replace it.
Yeah, well, with the Ravens there, it's just a culture. So, I mean, it might be a astute point, but I think, but obviously they've proven they can overcome losing the defensive coordinator. So, good point by you there. All right. D-line coach. You had mentioned on the last podcast this was going to happen, and this has happened. They have a new D-line coach.
Yeah, and that's, as far as we know, right? That's the only change on that side of the ball, right? The running back coach, the tight end, the offense coordinator on offense, and then this is the only move that we know of on defense, and it's Jacques Cesaire. He was the defensive line coach the last 2 years in Houston and didn't have his contract renewed. And you wonder about that because obviously the Texans had a good year. They go to the playoffs. They beat the Browns. He had Will Anderson Jr. and Jonathan Grenard at their ends, and they had big years. But they had a new coach. D'Amico Ryans kept him for a year. Maybe he had his own guy, right? He gives him a shot. He had his own guy he wanted to go to. You never know when there's coaching changes and a guy stays, right? You just never know how that fit is. So it's an interesting hire. I don't know if I mentioned this last week. He doesn't have a background with Jim Schwartz, which I kind of thought maybe Schwartz would bring in a guy he knew. But that's not the case. They're going with Cesaire. He played 9 years in the league. He was mostly defensive end in the league. Started 66 games. 12 and a half sacks. So that wasn't his bread and butter. But players. You don't have to be a former player for the players to respect you, obviously, right? Schwartz wasn't. Kevin Stefanski wasn't a former NFL player, but it does add something. And it's interesting because there's going to be more turnover on that line, but you have Myles Garrett back. You have Obo Okoronkwo for sure, Alex Wright, Dalvin Tomlinson. So you have those guys, and you have a new coach, and Myles Garrett's been through, it's not like he's been through, but he's had a bunch of different coaches. You wonder how he's going to deal with that. You wonder if maybe maybe the new coach gets something more out of Myles Garrett, right? Is that even possible? Or just as a group, right? Can this group, which is the Browns say it over and over, the defensive line's the engine of Jim Schwartz's defense. Can it take even a bigger step? Because I thought it was good last year, but maybe it can take another step to an elite level. And instead of being, tied for sixth in the league in sacks, they lead the league in sacks or whatever it is, right? So I think it's interesting because I wouldn't have said that the defensive line had a bad year. I thought they had a good year, but obviously they believe there's more to get out of that position group, those players. And we'll see. Ben Bloom held that position. He was a D-line coach. We'll see if he comes back in a different capacity because the option is there. There's a chance that he comes back as a run game coordinator. But we don't know if that's for certain yet or not.
Have you written Obo's name enough times that if I put you on the spot in the spelling bee, you could spell first and last name?
Yeah, I could for sure. I got that. I think I got it by August last year. It helped when instead of having to say Obaniah, he prefers Obo. That helps.
Obo. Yeah, you were happy about that.
Correct.
Yeah. But back to, we'll wrap this topic up with just real quick here is, you said, I don't know how you phrased it, but I guess you might be, Scott, after the season they had, are you a little surprised that you've had to deal with coaching, many coaching changes and this much talk and writing about coaching changes, just to sum it up?
Yeah. Yes. I was. I didn't think there'd be that much movement, coming off 11-6, what they did. Each move, I think if you break down each move, they're explainable, right? It makes some sense as a group. I think it's a little surprising. And then I think the other part of it is, Chud, the coordinator hire dragged on for a while. And that adds conversation. You get every time there's a new candidate, it's talked about, it's written about. So I think that adds to it. And then there's a void. Right? The Browns aren't playing. There's no other news. We're not at free agency. Something had to fill the void, and that filled the vacuum, or the vacuum, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Kareem Hunt, what's going on there?
Yeah, we know Kareem's tough, right? But this is just another example of how tough he is, how tough guys in this league are. We saw it with Amari Cooper at the end of last season, too. Kareem had sports hernia surgery to repair a ruptured adductor, and he went on the injury report for the first time September 27th, and with a groin. And groin can mean anything down there. It oftentimes means the sports hernia. And he would, he often missed a practice a week, and then would, practice at the end of the week and play. He didn't miss a game. And he tied for the team lead with 9 touchdowns during the regular season, had both touchdowns in the playoff loss. And he did it. I don't know how long the adductor was torn. I don't know if that was week 2 or week 3. And then he played the whole season with the torn one. Maybe it was partially torn and then it just got worse throughout the season. Regardless, he played with an injury that required surgery after the season and played pretty well.
Yeah, he is tough, no doubt. Anything Browns left here before we wrap it up with we won't break down the Super Bowl, but just break down those games. Anything else?
No, I think we're good on Browns. And then we get the Super Bowl, and at some point, but I don't think we need to get there yet. We'll have to turn to, okay, who can they resign in free agency, right? Where are the positions in need, right? The conversation never stops.
Yeah.
We're gonna have the combine. But for now, I think we're good with the Browns.
Yeah, let's save that for next week and weeks to come.
Yep.
So let's just wrap it up. Here we go. Yep. Chiefs, Niners, Super Bowl. I tell you, those were two very entertaining games. I just, I picked the Chiefs to win. Obviously not surprised. I'm guessing, but I'm surprised Baltimore was as bad as they were. I mean, in their own home, Lamar Jackson just that interception is one of the worst interceptions you'll see in the playoffs. Obviously, Flowers was huge, but that fumble was costly. But again, at the end of the day, I'm not going to look to it as much as what the Ravens didn't do. I'm going to look at it as exactly what I thought Mahomes. Scott, I'm sorry. I'm hitching my ride to Patty Mahomes every time.
Yeah, and you can't go wrong doing that, right, Chud? So good, and did exactly what they needed him to do. I mean, they only scored 17 points, right? I think that was the final, right? Was it 17?
Yeah. In the first half.
Right.
17-10.
Yeah, which if you're a Baltimore fan and Ravens organization, you think, oh my gosh, we held them. We had Patrick Mahomes punt every time in the second half until the final drive, right, where they got that big first down or a couple big first downs. And we still can't beat them, right? Like, I think Baltimore looks at it like there was a chance. Mahomes didn't go nuts. He didn't score 35, right? And they still couldn't get it done, which is, it's an indictment on Lamar Jackson. It's an indictment on Zay Flowers. It's an indictment on Todd Monken, the coordinator. But to get back to your point, Mahomes did what he needed to do. And they talked about getting the lead early, right? People who were around the Chiefs said that was something they stressed. Come out and do it. Get the points right away. Mahomes makes the fourth down throw to Kelsey, which is a great catch, great throw. Makes a touchdown. Kyle Hamilton, the safety for the Ravens. Oh my gosh, is he good? And I know they talked about him on the broadcast, maybe too much, but he's been outstanding all year. Was in great coverage on Kelsey, and it's a back shoulder. It's not a back shoulder, it's like a back kneecap, right? And Kelsey turns around and the ball's perfect. Coverage couldn't be any better. Great throw, great catch.
Yeah.
So Mahomes does what he needs to do to get the lead. And it's not just Mahomes, right? Andy Reid calls an unbelievable game, I thought. And I thought, in the playoffs, to me, the coaching gets magnified. And the coaching matchups get magnified. And I thought Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo, who calls plays on offense, calls plays on defense, I thought they won those matchups so convincingly that was maybe, to me, the story of the game. And it was Andy Reid getting the plays they needed early to get the points. I thought was a remarkable job. And then you get to the end, and it's a touchdown game, right? It's a one-score game, and you need to convert 3rd and 9. And Mahomes says, give me the ball, and buys enough time and lofts the rainbow, and they run under it and catch it. And that's what incredible. He needed to do, right? Like, he makes the play when it needs to be made. And, we're going to see the play a million times when they beat the 49ers in the Super Bowl, and it's 3rd and 15, and he throws that ball to Tyreek Hill. Like, at the biggest moments, when you need a huge play, and if you're the Ravens, you're going, it's 3rd and 9, we got him. The Niners think it's 3rd and 15, they got him, and they don't, because it's Patrick Mahomes. So he's incredible. I don't think the loss was all Lamar. I mean, Zay Flowers, that fumble at the goal line, oh my God, what a huge play, right? Like, Lamar might not throw that pick in the end zone if it's a 3-point game and not a 10-point game, right? Like, things change, and you're probably more careful with the ball. It's still a terrible interception. But that Zay Flowers play, which followed the taunting, which was a terrible taunt. I mean, what's he doing, right? To me, that was the biggest chunk of the game.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been where Flowers kept him in the game. I mean, he had a touchdown and he had a really great game. But so he had them where they needed to be, kind of, but then he took it away from them. I mean, it's one of those situations. I mean, where like you said, terrible penalty, fumble was costly, and immaturity.
Yeah.
Getting the injury on his helmet. But I just seeing here, Commanders hired Dan Quinn.
Yeah.
As their next head coach. All right. You're right. I mean, it's just Flowers. That's tough to see a guy do that. But at the end of the day, yeah, you're right. You can't put it all on Lamar. Also on the game plan. I mean, the Ravens went away from their identity. Instead of running the ball, they were passing a ton.
Yeah, and I'm not removing blame for Lamar. Like, he did not play well. He did not play up to the MVP that he's going to be. So it's not, I'm not taking the blame away from Lamar. I'm just saying that I think the biggest play in the game was Flowers, right? And Lamar kind of put him in a position to score a touchdown there. But Lamar did not play great overall. There's no doubt about it. But I also think, I'm glad you brought it up, he wasn't helped by the game plan. Could you imagine if Stefanski only ran it 6 times with his running backs in a playoff game that was decided by 7 points and the other team only scored 17? Like, he would be run out of town, right? Like, that's all the conversation would be about. Like, that's the only thing that would come up was, how could you only run the ball 6 times with your running backs when you were the best running team in the league? It's hard to comprehend what Monken did. And Monken had a big impact this season, right? Took over. But, did he revert to he's a spread guy, right? I think he came from that in college, was a spread the field type of guy. He was brought to Baltimore to add to that passing game because they've always been good running the ball. I don't think he didn't have the success early running, but 6 times isn't enough. Maybe Kansas City said, hey, we're going to come out and take the run away. And Monken said, that's fine. We're going to beat you passing. But that didn't work. And they never got back to the run like they should have, right? At least to try it, at least to see if there was a way that it could work. You could take some pressure off Lamar. I think it was a huge miss there for Todd Monken in that game. And you got to credit on the other half. You got to credit Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator for the Chiefs.
Yeah. I just, when people were counting the Chiefs out there at the end of the regular season, I was just sitting there going, man, don't do that. Don't count out Mahomes. Yeah. These guys, the defending champs, that's where, you give them, they totally turned it around. And, I don't know if I will doubt them in the Super Bowl either. We're not going to make picks here. We can do a pod next week and make a pick. But anyway, on the other end, San Francisco, boy, what a comeback. I mean, down 24-7. And I have to be honest, I don't know. I could have seen it going either way at that point. I guess there's a part that was like, blow this, but the other part was like, no, they shouldn't. They got to win this game up 24-7. So I guess I'm not shocked at the comeback. Maybe a little surprised, but in San Francisco, Purdy gets it done. Just everything had to seemingly go their way. They get a fumble. An incredible was that incredible catch. Just things had to go their way.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Again, if you're Detroit, right, it's, oh my gosh, how do we not protect a 17-point lead and get their first Super Bowl, right? Like, that's all it's going to be about, is not being able to close out the game. If you're San Francisco, it's, you had a whole half left. You're a big-time offense. Scoring those points isn't unheard of. So I think you can look at it both ways. But yeah, they did. That's the anatomy of a comeback, right? You get a touchdown. The Lions don't go for it, or they do go for it instead of kicking a field goal. So it stays 14 points, stays 2-score game. You get a touchdown, you get a fumble, recovery, boom, all of a sudden you're back in the game, right? Like, it can turn around that fast, and you gotta have help from the other team, whether that's 3 and outs, turnovers, not kicking field goals, right? Like, whatever that is. So that's what they did. That's, the kind of the confluence of events there. Brock Purdy, he played really well. And, there's so much discussion about him. His second year, he's playing great. Now, I think you do have to admit or acknowledge he gets a break there, right? He throws that post route and it bounces off the face mask of the Lions guy, right? And leads to a touchdown.
Yeah.
Like if the guy catches it, there was a flag thrown, but they never announced the penalty, right? So I don't know if they decided there was no call there. If it had been an incompletion, do we have a pass interference? I don't know how that would have played out, but I certainly know it looks like they got a giant break, right, by the guy not intercepting the ball. Like the whole game's completely different if that guy intercepts it and there's no penalty and it doesn't bounce off his face mask. So you get a couple breaks, but then he made some big plays scrambling, big throws, made some big plays with his arm. Yeah, so 49ers, I thought they'd be more dominant in the playoffs, and they haven't been, and I think they've shown some vulnerabilities. Both sides of the ball, but mostly defensively, right? The Lions went up and down the field on them early. So it's going to be interesting. I think it sets up a really good Super Bowl. I can't remember. Did you pick the Chiefs coming out of the AFC at the beginning of the year?
Scott, I picked them both.
Did you? I knew you had the Niners.
Chiefs,
I thought you had the Chiefs, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Right? So so it's a great matchup. It's you got it on. You had on the money. Two favorites coming into the season. But I think it's different how they got there, right? Like Kansas City had its struggles. The Niners had a couple struggles early, but then played really well at the end, and they're on a roll. And then they've kind of struggled a little bit in the playoffs, although they've won. I just think it's interesting how we got to this matchup. And I got to ask you, Chud, what do you think about? I mean, it's been the talk, right? What do you think about the Dan Campbell 4th down calls?
I mean, live by the sword, die by the sword, I guess, right? I mean, that's what I watched his I didn't watch his whole presser, but on X I watched the clip, and I mean he said he has no regrets. He goes, that's how he coaches, and people are gonna blame him and they might not understand, but I guess what did he say? He was trying to light a spark, or I can't remember exactly what he said, but I guess that's how they play. I know that he's getting crushed. Yeah. For everyone's like, hey, there's field goals for a reason. So I just feel like, Scott, I feel like that's just the way it is now. How about in the Ravens game? I mean, they went for it early. I can't remember when it was, but they went for it, remember, on 4th down, like on their own 20, 4th and 5. Like, that's just stuff you didn't see when we were kids, man. And it's different now. It's a different game. And when that stuff works, I mean, it's like last week with the Bills, that fake punt, that was stupid. That was terrible. We're just seeing more and more of stuff like that, whether it's things you do or don't do.
Yeah, you're completely right about that, Chud. And it's gotten to the point where I don't even think twice about it. Like it's like, I kind of expect this to happen, right? And that doesn't mean it's the right call or the right decision. It's just, okay, I get it. That's where we are now in the NFL. But you're right. There's a million examples. I think Kansas City tried to go for it late in the first half instead of kicking a field goal, which I did not like at the time, and they don't get it. And it stays whatever it was, a 14-point game at the time, or a 7-point game. And it seems like they could have taken the points there and didn't, if I'm remembering that correctly. And then Detroit did take the points before the half, but then in the second half, they don't. And, I'm not going to kill Dan Campbell for it, because I think, the whole, well, just because the outcome doesn't go your way doesn't mean the decision's wrong. And I agree with that philosophy, right? Like, you can make a good decision and the outcome's poor. Like that just can happen. And I think you have to stick true to your process and continue to make the right decisions. And over time, it will play out in the right way. I do believe that. Now, does it always turn out the right way in that moment? No. And other things happen, right? The guy Josh Reynolds drops the 4th down throw. Like if he catches it, it's a different conversation, right? And so all that's involved. If the kicker misses, then you go, man, they should have gone for it. So I get that it's not a black and white decision, but I do think of all the choices, the one that resonates with me is if you have a chance to take a 3-score lead in the second half, that's a big deal. And I'm sure the analytics, I believe the analytics take all this into account, right? And they do the win probability, and you're trying to win on the margin. So I completely understand all of those things. But I do wonder if maybe and I don't know what his particular analytics said, right? Everybody has their own data that they use. So it's not like just umbrella of analytics. My point is that going from 14 to 17 in the third quarter is, to me, is huge. And they missed that opportunity. Now, if they had gotten the first down and they scored a touchdown, right, then you take that into account too, right? It's 21 instead of 14. It's a huge, or instead of 17, it's a huge deal. So I understand that. But like, I feel like getting to that third score is a big deal. And when they don't get it, it winds up coming back to haunt them. You know what I'm saying?
But I'm gonna counter that with the fact that you saw what the Niners ended up doing, and they got hot. Yeah. And I know everything kind of had to go their way, but if you're Campbell and you're sensing that the Niners are going to do that, and you go for it and you end up scoring a touchdown, that could have been the backbreaker that won you the game. So that's where, and we're talking about a guy who just took a franchise from the dumpster and put them on the doorstep of their first Super Bowl ever, so that's why I think at the end of the day, I understand your point and I understand why he's getting crushed, but that's the type of coaching that has them where they're at, and they're probably not going to go away. And so that's kind of the way I look at it.
Chud, that's such a great point. And I have thought that too. Like, you're coaching with the idea that San Francisco is probably going to score here, right? I don't trust my defense for whatever, or it's just San Francisco's really good, right? Whatever it is, man, San Francisco winds up getting to 30-something, so we needed to get there too. So I completely get your point. And I would not kill Campbell for any of these decisions. But I'm just saying the one thing that kind of sticks in my head is that 2-score to 3-score, right? Like, that's where if I were Campbell and I'm going back and I'm reassessing myself, doing that self-scout, whatever, like, that's the question I would have is, okay, are we still better off? And maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is, hey, we needed to get the 21-point lead. But that's the one thing that sticks in my head is, man, if we'd gone 3 scores, maybe it changes something. San Francisco has to throw more, whatever it is, right? Like, maybe just that it's just enough difference that we would have been able to win at the end.
Maybe if you're at home, maybe if you're playing a different team. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's circumstantial. Yeah. But how about this one? I've always known the answer to this, and I'm not to put you on the spot, and I'm sure you're gonna the answer, but you know the 4 teams that have never been to a Super Bowl.
Yes.
Okay. So what I find interesting about that is I've always known, and for those that don't know, and I'm sure most people do, but it's, of course, our Brownies, the Lions, Jacksonville, and Houston. And what I didn't think about, though, until I was watching the broadcast, I think Jim Nantz said this, the Lions are the only team that's been around for every Super Bowl that hasn't been there, because you forget the Browns, when they moved, I didn't even think about that.
Chud, I'm so glad you brought this up.
Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And I heard him say that, and I thought to myself, what's
Did I lose you?
No, I got you. I'm thinking, what's he talking about, right? The Browns. And then it dawned on me, oh my God, the Browns lost for 3 years. Yeah. And then I thought to myself, that's a garbage stat. because like, that was Jim Nantz's way. And I had a tweet typed out. And I said, well, I don't think I want to deal with any blowback that I get. I don't want to throw Jim Nantz under a bus here. But I think it was his way of saying, oh my God, it's been so hard for the Detroit. They've had every opportunity, 58 opportunities to go to the Super Bowl. Well, I mean, to me, that's not a big differentiation from the Browns going 0 for 55. You know what I mean? Like, the Browns weren't going to go, they weren't going in those 3 years, right? I mean, who knows, right? But you know what I'm saying? Like, I thought it was him finding this little thing that he could make Detroit seem the worst case. And I'm like, yeah, come on.
And it worked.
You know what I mean?
Because I fell for it. It worked. I mean, think about it. Like, you had a reaction to it. I had a reaction to it.
True.
I mean, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
I always just clump, because I know Houston hasn't been around for a while. Like, I mean, the Oilers were, but now they're Tennessee. So, I mean, it's just funny that way. I don't know. One last thing before we go here. And I know you're not the conspiracy theorist, so you don't buy this. Like, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me. Oh, the refs, Kansas City. I mean, come on. I just don't buy that.
No, I don't buy it at all. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And here's an example of, I saw this on Twitter, and it was one of the Schwartz brothers. I don't know if it's Jeff or Mitchell, the former offensive lineman. Mitchell was here with the Browns for a long time, and then was in Kansas City. One of them said, you can't get into this where you just go play by play, like, oh my God, they screwed up this play. Oh my God, they screwed up this play, right? Like the officials. There's a play in that game where Mahomes drops back in the end zone. I think maybe it's Lamar. No, it's anyway. It's proving that the Chiefs don't get all the calls because it's Lamar. Lamar drops back in the end zone, and he's got a rusher. Let's say it's Chris Jones. I can't remember if it's exactly Chris Jones, but there's a rusher coming free, and he gets tripped by a Ravens guy in the end zone. So it should have been a safety, and they should be free kicking to the Chiefs. They don't call the trip, which is pretty obvious, in the end zone. Lamar completes a pass, whatever, right? So that's a huge missed call that should have gone against the Ravens that doesn't. And if you're oh my God, the Chiefs get all the calls, you just ignore that part, right? So there's plenty of calls in a game. There's plenty of calls that are right and wrong. I don't think, first of all, I don't love talking about it, talking about the officiating. We've talked about that before. Second of all, I don't think that they had the impact on the game. And the interception Lamar threw, you can say the guy ran into the tight end in the end zone. Yes, he did. There are three guys there. The ball was underthrown. It was going to be an interception. To me, that's the right no call, right? You don't call an interference 5 yards deeper that wouldn't have mattered. I think that's the right no call. So I don't think the Chiefs got a bunch of good calls. I mean, I saw people immediately reacting to the David Clowney roughing the passer. Oh my God, you can't call this in this game. He put his helmet into Mahomes' chin. Like that is a roughing the passer. The taunt was the right call. Like
those are the calls.
Yeah, Mahomes gets hit across the face. That's the right call.
How about the back-to-back holding calls or whatever on the Chiefs offensive linemen where they could have gone in and even put the game away right there before halftime. Remember?
Right, on that screen call, which offensive linemen will tell you that's just how a screen works. Right?
Exactly.
But they call So I'm completely with you, Chud. And how about real quick, that 3rd and 5, or the Chiefs, there's a penalty when the Chiefs are trying to run out the clock. And the Ravens get a penalty, so it's 1st and 5. I think they might have 12 men on the field, whatever. So it's 1st and 5, and then they purposely jump off the line of script, jump off sides, so it's 1st and 10 instead of 1st and 5, right? Because they're trying to manage the clock. It's better for the defensive 1st and 10, even though it's 5 yards ahead, right? So I'm watching it and I'm going, man, I think he did that on purpose, which makes sense. Like all that goes through my mind real quick. And then they flag him 15 yards because instead of just jumping off sides, he runs over the guard, right? And the officials are smart enough to go, hey, you can't, if you want to get called for offsides, you can get called for offsides, but you can't just light somebody up, for no reason. I just thought that was an interesting thing that you don't see very often, but I could understand why the Ravens did it. Of course, for a team that gets penalized 15 yards all day, they get another one because even then they screw that up.
Yeah. I know you have a lot of concerns and stresses right now in your life, one of which being whether you'll make it to the golf range or not today. But I know you are going to lose some sleep here over the next week and a half, whether or not Taylor Swift will be able to make it back from Tokyo in time to be at the game.
I sure hope so. Isn't it easy enough just to move the concert up a couple hours to make sure you can get to the Super Bowl? Like it feels like she should be able to do that. So I think she'll get there.
If you had Taylor Swift tickets and you're set to go at a certain time, I mean, you might have your date
6 or 8. Aren't you tailgating anyway at the Taylor Swift show?
Yeah, well, that's true.
How about this stat? Of all the stats, somebody, I think it was Colin Cowherd, right? He's got a famous thing that's going across X. He's defending Taylor Swift and killing the people that are offended by Taylor Swift, and I totally agree with Colin Cowherd. But CBS showed her for a total of 41 seconds.
I saw that.
Something crazy, right? Like there's all this outrage, and it might be fake outrage, but there's all this quote unquote outrage over, oh my gosh, they're showing her so much. 41 seconds. The game's 3.5 hours. Who cares? Right? Like we see they show the grass more than 41 seconds. So I love that stat because I think it shows people get carried away about stupid stuff.
Well, they're just mad she's in the building regardless. Right. And I personally have no issue with it. Now, listen, 25-year-old Chud, sportscaster Chud probably wouldn't have brought it up. But, a much older Chud with 2 daughters.
See?
I'm all about it. All right.
So
I also
evolved.
Yeah, I also host a morning show instead of sports now. So I don't have a problem with the Taylor Swift, because trust me, we talk about it a lot, Scott. We talk about it a lot.
There you go, buddy.
Well, speaking of talking, I'm all out. I got to go get a nap. So I think we're done.
We are done. Thank you so much, Chud. We'll see you again next week with a little Super Bowl prediction pod. Maybe by then we'll have met. We'll have finalized coaching staffs. Maybe we'll have a Ken Dorsey news conference to talk about. That'd be nice. A little more Browns coverage, but we'll certainly talk Super Bowl next week. So appreciate it. As always, Chud, appreciate everybody listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you can read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks.